For 30 years, Margaret worked tirelessly as a janitor in a small Midwestern town, scrubbing school hallways and office bathrooms, saving every dime she could. Her entire life revolved around one goal: to give her adopted son, Ryan, a better future. She sacrificed comfort, rest, and even her health to ensure he never lacked anything. And now, with his wedding approaching, she had finally saved enough to buy him a house as a gift. Something she never thought possible. Just days before the wedding, Margaret was admitted to the hospital for a serious leg infection. Confined to a hospital bed, she felt torn. Desperate to recover and attend the wedding, but trusting that Ryan would understand. She clutched the bank card that held her life's savings, the same card she planned to hand to him, as a symbol of her love and pride. But everything changed the day she overheard a conversation between the doctor and her son. Hidden behind the hospital curtain, Margaret's world shattered as Ryan referred to her not as Mom, but as his stepmother. A title that cut deeper than any wound. What came next revealed the heartbreaking truth. Ryan was ashamed of her, and had already replaced her in the most important moment of his life. Lying in her hospital bed, Margaret tried to make sense of what she had just heard. The doctor, Dr. Harris, a man who had always treated her kindly, was speaking in hushed tones to Ryan just outside her room, but every word cut like a blade. "Ryan," Dr. Harris said, "your mother's infection is serious. If it continues without surgery, she could lose the leg." Ryan's voice was low, firm. "She's not my real mother. She's my adoptive mom. I care about her, but I can't let her presence overshadow my biological mother's role at the wedding." Margaret's heart froze. "She's always been proud," Ryan continued. "Even if she was crawling, she'd still try to show up. But Mandy's parents are university professors. I can't have them sitting next to a janitor." Dr. Harris paused. "You know, I've known her for years. She's given up everything for you. You really going to leave her out like this?" But Ryan was unmoved. "Look, I'm not abandoning her. I'll still take care of her if she ends up in a wheelchair. But for the wedding, my real mother should be there. Not Gina." Margaret clutched her blanket, trying to stay composed. She had thought that Ryan didn't want her at the wedding because of her health. But it wasn't about that. It was about shame. He didn't want to be seen with her. All the sacrifices, all the years, meant nothing to him. A sharp pain in her chest was followed by another blow. Ryan, thinking she was asleep, came into the room and wiped her hands gently. He whispered to his fiancée, Mandy, who had just entered. "Don't worry. Mom's unconscious. She'll never know. Once I get her savings, I'll buy you that car you wanted." Margaret's breath caught. The money she had saved for his future, for his happiness, was now just a ticket to luxury for someone who saw her as a nuisance. Mandy leaned close to Ryan and kissed his cheek. "You're amazing, baby. I mean, I know it sucks your adoptive mom's around, but once the money's in our hands, we'll finally be free." Margaret's vision blurred. Not from tears, but from sheer disbelief. Years ago, Ryan had been a scrawny boy clinging to her sleeve outside an orphanage. She had taken him home without hesitation, believing love alone could heal every wound. She had worked multiple jobs to give him everything. She went hungry to afford his school books. She walked home in the snow so he could ride the bus. Now, that same boy, her son, had orchestrated her downfall. And yet, Margaret still hoped. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he just needed time. But when she heard Mandy say, "Your real mom looks so elegant. If we play this right, she might buy us a bigger house." Something inside Margaret broke. They weren't just replacing her. They were erasing her. She stared at the bank card in her hand, then tucked it quietly under her pillow. If Ryan truly thought his real mother was better, then let her pay for the house, the wedding, and the life he wanted. Margaret was done. The next morning, Margaret sat silently in her hospital bed, hands folded tightly over the bank card she no longer intended to give away. Her heart still burned from the betrayal, but her mind was clear. She needed to act, not weep. When Ryan left the room to get her prescription, he carelessly left his phone on the bedside table. Margaret knew the passcode. She had helped him set it years ago. With trembling fingers, she unlocked the device. There, in plain sight, was the truth. Photos of Ryan dining with a woman around her age, but far more youthful in appearance. Elegant restaurants, designer handbags, cozy selfies, messages like, "So proud to call you mom. Can't wait to introduce you properly at the wedding." It was Carrie, Ryan's birth mother. The same woman who, 12 years ago, told Margaret to never contact her again. "That child is a burden," she had said. "Don't drag me into it." Margaret had shielded Ryan from that truth, allowing him to believe his biological mother loved him, but hadn't found him yet. She never wanted him to carry the weight of rejection. Instead, she carried it for him. Now Carrie was back, and not only had Ryan welcomed her, he was flaunting her. Margaret's breath hitched as she scrolled further. Voice messages, affectionate emojis, video calls. She noticed a pattern Carrie rarely initiated. Ryan always chased. It was as if he was desperate for her validation, offering gifts, praise, and even money. In one message, he wrote, "Mom, the apartment Gina got us is too small. If you could help. Mandy and I want to buy a bigger house." That was when Margaret's sadness turned into something else. Resolve. She opened her own messaging app and texted her closest friend, Helen, a nurse practitioner who had once mentioned knowing top orthopedic surgeons. "Helen, I need the best. I'm done saving for others. Now I save myself." When Ryan returned, he was all smiles, pretending concern. "Mom, you're awake. I was so worried," he said, voice syrupy. "I've missed you so much. I wish you could come to the wedding, but the doctor says you need to rest." Margaret looked at him calmly, gently brushing a strand of his hair aside. "I'll be there," she whispered. His smile faltered. "Wait, what? You said I was an important guest. Didn't you?" she said, with a soft but pointed smile. "Don't worry, I'll make sure I'm at your wedding." Ryan stumbled through a response, eyes flickering with panic. "No, Mom, I mean, it might be too much, too crowded. You should rest, it's best for your health." But Margaret had already decided. For 30 years, she had cleaned floors, folded his laundry, and patched his life back together. But now, she was cleaning up something far messier. Her own dignity. And it was time to confront the people who thought they could erase her with a designer scarf and a smile. Margaret sat by the hospital window, sunlight hitting the scar on her leg, a silent testament to decades of labor, sacrifice, and silence. For years, she had told herself that being a good mother meant giving everything, even when nothing was given in return. But now, that belief was starting to unravel. She looked down at her worn hands, the same ones that had washed Ryan's baby clothes, cooked his meals, and wiped his tears. Those hands had built his life. But he now only saw them as the hands of a janitor, someone who didn't fit into the polished world he was trying to buy his way into. When her friend Helen confirmed that she'd arranged an appointment with the top orthopedic surgeon in the state, Margaret didn't hesitate. No more holding back. No more saving money for people who only saw her as an am with a mop. In the weeks that followed her surgery, Margaret began to heal. Not just physically, but emotionally. She read books again. She sat quietly with herself, and for the first time in years, she dared to ask, "What do I want?" Ryan, unaware of her recovery, texted occasionally, but always with one question looming underneath. "When are you transferring the money?" She didn't respond. Then came the wedding rehearsal. Ryan wheeled her in like a prop, into a separate room, away from the guests. "Mom," he said, "Mandy's a little sensitive to smells, so it's best if you stay here during the rehearsal. The medicine. You understand, right?" Margaret said nothing. But later, as she rolled herself down the hallway, determined to see what she had paid for, she heard staff whispering. "They're pretending the real mom is an actress playing the adoptive one." No. His adoptive mom is actually here, just hidden away. Yikes. Must be hard having a janitor for a mom in front of all these high-class folks. Her chest tightened, again. The shame wasn't about who she was, but about what others thought she was. At the rehearsal stage, she caught a glimpse of Carrie, dressed in an elegant beige suit, accepting compliments and gifts from Mandy's family. Margaret watched quietly, her presence unnoticed but her heart racing. Then she heard Mandy whisper to Ryan. If we get Carrie on our side, maybe she'll buy us that big house. Margaret clenched the armrests of her chair. The house she had already planned to buy, the one she had worked 3 decades for. That was the moment something inside her shifted. She wasn't just excluded. She was replaced by a woman who had once discarded Ryan like a piece of trash. Now, Carrie was the trophy, the real mother in a curated social performance. But Margaret wasn't about to let them keep writing the story. Not this time. If they thought they were marrying into money and manipulation, they forgot who taught Ryan how to survive in the first place. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and crisp, but Margaret was no longer the woman wheeled into a side room and hidden away. She had made her decision. Today, she would not sit silently in the shadows of her own sacrifice. She chose a radiant sky blue dress, pressed and elegant. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly, and she even put on the pearl earrings she'd kept locked away for years. Ones she'd bought long ago, but never felt worthy enough to wear. She wasn't going as Ryan's mother. She was going as herself. At the venue, no one recognized her as the woman in the hospital bed weeks earlier. She blended into the crowd, sitting quietly at the farthest corner near the stage. Her presence was invisible, just as Ryan wanted. He walked past her once and didn't even blink. But Margaret didn't care. Her time would come. As guests mingled and the wedding atmosphere warmed, Margaret heard Ryan on the phone whispering to Mandy, "She'll bring the money. Don't worry, she's too old and tired to cause trouble. Just play nice. We'll get it today." Mandy rolled her eyes but smiled politely for the guests. Carrie, dressed in an off-white designer gown, floated from table to table, accepting compliments. "Jeff's mother is so graceful," one guest murmured. "No wonder he turned out so well." Margaret's hands tightened in her lap. Graceful, they had no idea. After the newlyweds exchanged vows, the floor was opened for speeches. People gave blessings, raised glasses, and the music played on. That's when Margaret stood, walked quietly toward the stage, and pulled from her bag an old, worn air horn. It blared, echoing like thunder across the banquet hall. All heads turned. Ryan's face went pale as a sheet. Mom, what are you doing?" he stammered, rushing toward her. "You asked me to bring you the money," Margaret said, her voice calm but powerful. "How could I not deliver such a thoughtful wedding gift?" Gasps rippled through the room. Whispers filled the air. "That's his adoptive mother." "Wait, she's the one who paid for all this." Mandy tugged at Ryan's arm. "Just let her give us the money and leave," she hissed through clenched teeth. But Margaret didn't move. She slowly reached for the suitcase at her feet and placed it gently on the table. Ryan's eyes lit up. "Finally. I raised this boy," Margaret announced to the room. "From the moment he grabbed my sleeve outside an orphanage. I taught him how to walk, how to speak, how to dream. And now, I stand here, not as a janitor, but as the woman who gave him everything he has." Ryan stepped forward to grab the suitcase, but Margaret raised a hand. "I do have a gift," she said, "but it's not the one you're expecting." She opened the suitcase and tossed a handful of bills into the air. "Fake bills." People gasped. Mandy lunged forward and snatched the suitcase, empty. The illusion shattered. Margaret stood tall. "The real gift I'm giving you today is freedom. Mine." As the fake bills floated to the floor and whispers spread like wildfire across the venue, Margaret stood unmoved. Her voice rang out like a final judgment. "You mocked me. You hid me. You thought I was ashamed of being a janitor. No. I was ashamed of raising a son who'd sell his soul for status." Ryan's face turned scarlet. "You're doing this now. In front of everyone." "Yes," Margaret said, "because behind closed doors, you plotted against me. In front of your fiancé, your guests, your real mother. You made me disappear. But today, I reclaim my voice." Mandy hissed. "You're just bitter. You've embarrassed yourself. Take your trash and leave." But Margaret didn't flinch. "I paid for this venue, this banquet, even your wedding gown. I have every right to be here." Carrie, trying to maintain her composure, whispered something to Ryan, but Margaret turned on her too. 12 years ago, you called Ryan a burden and told me never to contact you again. Now that he has something to offer, suddenly you're mom again. Gasps. Margaret nodded toward the screen behind the stage, and with Helen's help, a video began to play. A recording of Carrie from years ago. If that boy shows up, don't call me. I don't want anything to do with him. He's not mine. I'm not ruining my life for a mistake I made as a teenager. The room fell into stunned silence. Carrie paled. Ryan looked like the floor had vanished beneath his feet. Then, as if karma had perfect timing, a well-dressed man stormed into the hall with security guards flanking him. Carrie, we're done, he snapped. Give you money, a car, a villa, and this is how you repay me. Lying about a child. He turned to Ryan. You're not mine. You're her problem. The guards escorted Carrie out, still sobbing and screaming. Ryan tried to follow, but one of the guards pushed him aside. The room fell quiet once more. Margaret slowly stepped off the stage and turned back to her son. No, to the boy she had raised. You wanted to erase me because I embarrassed you, but look around you now. Who's embarrassed? Ryan's lips trembled. I was wrong. Mom, please, Margaret raised her hand. Don't call me that. You lost that right. His voice cracked. I have nothing now. Please I need your help. Margaret shook her head. You had a mother who gave you everything, and you spit it back in her face. I won't let you do it again. She picked up her suitcase and walked past him. Dignified, composed, and free. Outside, Helen was waiting by the car. You sure you're okay? Margaret smiled. Better than ever. That day marked the death of the version of Margaret who lived for others. She no longer existed for a son who didn't see her, or a society that measured worth by status. She didn't just walk away from Ryan. She walked back to herself. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. For the first time in decades, Margaret wasn't waking up to a list of chores or unpaid sacrifices. She wasn't preparing breakfast for anyone. She wasn't calculating how to stretch $50 to feed 2 people for a week. Instead, she brewed coffee for herself. Slowly, purposefully. With the wedding behind her, and the toxic chapter with Ryan finally closed, Margaret sold the small apartment she once bought for him. She cashed out the savings she had guarded like treasure for 30 years. Not to hand over to someone else, but to finally invest in herself. She traveled, not to expensive resorts, but to quiet towns with bookstores, flower markets, and walking paths by lakes. She ate in places where no one looked at her hands or asked her what she did for a living. In those spaces, she was just a woman. One who had lived, lost, and learned. Then, one afternoon in a sunlit courtyard in Vermont, Margaret sat in a community center listening to a group of women sharing their stories. Most had raised children, some had lost them. All had once given too much. And now they were starting over. She stood up and told her own story. Not to gain sympathy, but to give others strength. I raised a son who forgot who I was, she said. But I also raised myself. I raised a woman who stopped begging to be loved and started loving herself. The room was quiet. Then came applause, not polite, but honest. Margaret eventually used part of her savings to found the Adversity Mother Fund, a program for single mothers and abandoned children. She didn't just donate money, she gave them dignity. She mentored. She showed them that survival could be more than just getting by. It could be the beginning of thriving. She rented a cozy cottage near the ocean and took up gardening and painting. 2 passions she had buried under years of service. Her yard bloomed with sunflowers and lavender. Her porch had chipped blue paint and a rocking chair that creaked in the breeze. It wasn't much, but it was hers. One spring morning, while hosting a painting workshop at a nearby senior home, a little girl wandered into the room. She was shy, her clothes slightly worn, her eyes full of questions. Margaret crouched to meet her at eye level. Looking for someone? She asked gently. The girl nodded. I don't know where I belong. Margaret smiled, her voice warm as the sun outside. Then let's find a place for you, together. In that moment, Margaret understood. Love doesn't end when it's betrayed. It reshapes, it redirects, It finds new hands to hold, new hearts to protect. She had lived for a boy who never looked back. Now, she was living for every girl who needed someone to look forward with. Margaret had been erased once. Now, she was writing the story herself. And this time, every word mattered. Margaret's journey teaches us one of life's hardest truths: love, even when pure, is not always returned in kind. She gave everything to raise a child, not expecting riches, just respect. But when the people we love the most betray us, we have a choice: continue to break for them, or rebuild for ourselves. For decades, Margaret thought motherhood meant sacrifice without boundaries. But sacrifice without recognition becomes exploitation. Her transformation didn't happen overnight. It took heartbreak, silence, and finally, the courage to speak up. When she was no longer needed, they tried to discard her. But instead of fading away, she rose, on her own terms. You can be a good parent, a good partner, a good person, and still say, enough. Your kindness should never be a weakness. And when people see your worth only after you've left, that's not your failure. That's your freedom. If you've ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or used by the very people you supported, know this: you're not alone. Like Margaret, it's never too late to reclaim your life. Start by honoring your own needs. Set boundaries. Say no. Invest in your happiness without guilt. Don't wait for others to value you. Begin by valuing yourself. Take that class, start that garden. Donate your time where it's truly appreciated. Heal at your pace. Forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Whether you're 30 or 70, your story is far from over. Let today be the day you stop surviving for others and begin living for yourself. Have you ever reached a point where you realized your silence was costing you too much? Share your moment of transformation below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories that honor the strength of women who rise.